Imagine sitting in a doctor's office. You're 26 years old, and you are being told that you have less than a year to live.
Wow. At 26.
Right. 26. Now imagine that your very first reaction to that news, your absolute, immediate, instinctual response is to celebrate.
Which is just, I mean, it's completely unfathomable for most people.
It really is. And today we're wading into a story that just completely shatters, our biological instinct for survival. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah, glad to be here with you.
We are looking at this deeply intimate, unflinching report from ABC News by David Marchese, and it profiles Annalise Holland. She goes by Annie, a 26-year-old from Adelaide, Australia, and she has chosen voluntary assisted dying.
Which we'll probably just refer to as VAD for short
Yep,
today.
VADs. Yeah. And really our mission for this deep dive is to explore the collision of chronic illness, bodily autonomy, and end-of-life choices, specifically through Annie's lived experience. And while you might assume this is a narrative entirely about death, it's actually surprisingly a story about agency. It's about dignity and this fierce, unyielding desire to control whatever time she has left.
But before we really get into the mechanics of her specific situation, we need to explicitly frame the boundaries of our conversation today.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because VAD is, an intensely complex, ethically fraught, and politically debated issue across the entire globe. I mean, it touches on jurisprudence, medical ethics, and deeply held religious and personal values.
Oh, heavily.
So our objective today is not to take a stance. We are not here to endorse VAD, nor are we here to condemn it. We aren't here to debate the underlying morality of the laws themselves.
Right, that's not what this is about.
Exactly. Our goal is strictly analytical. We are here to rigorously examine the facts of the legislation as they operate down in South Australia and to impartially understand Annie's perspective exactly as she presented it in the source material. We're basically using her specific journey as a lens, right, to understand the broader mechanics of how these systems and these deeply personal choices intersect.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we have to start with that reaction. It literally stops you in your tracks. When Annie was told her condition had progressed to the point where she could die within the next year, she called it a really happy thing.
A happy thing, yeah.
And she frequently jokes with her friends. She laughs and says, I'm dying. We need to talk about it.
I mean, the humor there is just, it's a massive coping mechanism, obviously.
Totally. But it's also completely counterintuitive to everything we understand about human nature, right? To try and conceptualize this for you, think about being trapped inside a grueling, endless marathon.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. Your body is failing. You are in agony. Your muscles are cramping. You literally can't take another step, but the road just keeps going. And then finally, someone shows you the finish line.
Yeah.
You wouldn't cry because the race is over. You would celebrate because the running is finally going to stop. But biologically speaking, I have to ask you, how does chronic suffering so thoroughly override the human brain's natural imperative to just stay alive at all costs?
What's fascinating here is it comes down to how the human brain processes the concepts of systemic control versus indefinite trauma.
Indefinite trauma.
Right. Because in a healthy physiological state, our primary biological directive is self-preservation.
Big life.
Stay alive. Death represents the ultimate loss of agency. It is the absolute unknown, and our neurology is just hardwired to avoid it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
However, when a severe illness has already stripped away your bodily autonomy, when your daily existence is defined by inescapable, escalating agony, the brain's calculus fundamentally shifts.
The math changes.
Totally.
Yeah.
The physical suffering becomes the known, terrifying constant, and the uncertainty of how long that suffering will endure, that becomes its own distinct form of psychological torture.
Wow. Yeah, just not knowing when it ends.
Exactly. So for Annie, receiving a definitive timeline knowing the end will occur within a year, it replaces that open-ended sentence of suffering with a tangible horizon line.
So the celebration isn't actually about dying itself. It's about the restoration of agency.
Precisely. She finally has a parameter. She can plan. She can make choices. She is no longer at the total mercy of a biological system that is actively torturing her.
Right.
The psychological relief of regaining control over your own narrative, finally holding the steering wheel even if the road is ending, that can override the primal fear of death. The terminal prognosis basically gives her back her autonomy.
But, and I think this is so important, the report doesn't paint her as this, superhero who has completely transcended fear.
No, not at all.
There is a really gritty vulnerability here. Despite the humor, she admits very candidly to the listener that the reality of the unknown still gets to her. She actually says, "If I really think about it at night, it kind of flips with me." Because at the end of the day, she acknowledges that none of us know what happens when we close our eyes for the last time. She confesses she's still a little scared.
And we really have to sit with that duality to fully grasp her reality. Humans possess this unique cognitive architecture that allows us to hold two entirely conflicting truths simultaneously.
Right.
Truth one, the physical suffering is unbearable, and the cessation of that suffering is a profound relief.
Yeah.
Truth two, the existential dread of non-existence is inherently terrifying. Choosing VAD does not mean the fear of death just magically vanishes.
It doesn't just go away because you made a choice.
Exactly. It simply means the fear of continuing to live in an agonizing present has eclipsed the fear of the unknown future.
That is, wow.
Yeah. Her admission that the nights are hard, it strips away any romanticization. She isn't skipping joyfully toward the end. She is making a calculated, excruciatingly difficult trade-off, and it's driven entirely by the physical reality of her disease.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of what is happening to her body. Because to understand why her brain is making this intense trade-off, we really have to look closely at the physiological nightmare she's enduring.
We do.
Annie was diagnosed at 18 with a rare condition called Autoimmune Autonomic Ganglionopathy, or AG.
Right, AG.
And the source material describes it pretty simply as her immune system attacking her autonomic nervous system. But let's look under the hood here. What exactly is AG doing to her on a cellular and systemic level?
Well, to understand AG, we really have to understand the autonomic nervous system first.
Okay.
Think of your body as a highly advanced smart home. You don't have to consciously tell the thermostat to turn on, or the security system to lock the doors, or the plumbing to regulate water pressure, right?
All right. It just happens.
The autonomic nervous system is that central invisible computer. It regulates your heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, body temperature, even pupil dilation. It's the autopilot.
Okay, I'm with you.
So in AG, the immune system produces rogue antibodies. And these antibodies specifically target and bind to the receptors in the autonomic ganglia, essentially. They sever the communication cables between the brain and the body's vital organs.
Oh, wow. So it's like a vicious malware that doesn't just shut the smart home down, it completely scrambles the code.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It turns the heat up to 120 degrees while randomly locking the doors and shutting off the water.
That sounds horrific.
The results are catastrophic and systemic. You are dealing with a total system failure where your body literally forgets how to perform the basic autonomic functions required to sustain life.
And the daily toll detailed in the report, I mean, it's staggering. She spends roughly 17 hours a day, either in bed or on the couch.
17 hours.
Her physical world has shrunk entirely. She vomits constantly. She endures more than a dozen injections a day just for pain relief.
Yeah.
But there are two specific details in this report that just hit you like a freight train. First, she mentions that her jaw is slowly dissolving and that she will soon have to have her teeth removed. Let's just stop right there. Why would a nervous system disorder cause your skeletal structure, like your jawbone, to disintegrate?
It comes back to the autonomic nervous system's control over blood vessels.
Okay.
The system dictates vasodilation and vasoconstriction, basically, how wide or narrow your blood vessels are, which determines blood flow to various parts of the body.
Right, so it controls the plumbing.
Yes, and when those signals are constantly misfiring or completely blocked due to that antibody attack we talked about, peripheral tissues can be starved of oxygen and vital nutrients.
Oh, I see.
So it can lead to conditions resembling a vascular necrosis, where the bone tissue literally starves to death because it lacks a blood supply.
It starves to death.
Yeah. The body then begins to reabsorb the dead bone tissue. So her jaw is dissolving because the biological infrastructure required to keep it alive has just been severed.
A 26-year-old watching her own facial structure disintegrate. She describes herself as having become a shell of herself.
It's devastating.
But the second detail is even more immediate, and it establishes this terrifying ticking clock. Because her digestive system is failing, she has to be fed intravenously.
Right.
But she is currently relying on her last accessible vein.
Her very last one.
Yes. All her other veins have either collapsed, become blocked, or gotten infected.
Which is unfortunately a very common, devastating consequence of long-term total parenteral nutrition, or TPN.
TPN, okay.
When you are constantly infusing highly concentrated nutritional fluids directly into the venous system, it irritates the lining of the blood vessels.
I can imagine.
And over time, this causes phlebitis, which is inflammation of the vein, and thrombosis, which is clotting. Once a vein is severely scarred or clotted, you can't use it anymore. You have to move to another one.
And Annie has just run out of viable real estate.
Exactly.
And she knows that if she gets a single clot in this final, fragile vein, there is no way to feed her. She will literally die by starvation. She has actually watched other people with her specific disease go through exactly that, and she calls it a horrible way to go. Which, honestly, raises a massive question about modern medicine for me.
What's that?
Well, we have all this technology, right? We can pump nutrition through a single vein. We can administer a dozen injections a day to mask the pain. But at what point does our medical intervention stop saving a life and start merely prolonging a death?
And that is the exact ethical threshold Annie is confronting. Medical technology has become exceptionally proficient at extending the biological quantity of life.
Right.
We can sustain respiration and circulation long after the body has lost the ability to do so independently. But Annie states explicitly that quality is so much more important than quantity.
Quality over quantity.
Exactly. When the quantity of your life is defined by 17 hours of immobility, constant vomiting, bone resorption, and the terrifying precarity of relying on a single vein for sustenance, the concept of saving a life becomes medically and philosophically distorted.
It really does.
The threat of starvation, if that final vein clots, represents an absolute loss of bodily autonomy. Her decision to pursue VAD is an assertion of the only agency she has left, deciding how her life concludes, rather than waiting for her failing biology to inflict a protracted, undignified death upon her.
But, Annie wasn't always an advocate for this. The narrative of the report shifts from her physical reality to this fascinating ideological evolution.
Yes, the shift.
She says, I used to be one of those people who was actually against voluntary assisted dying. It wasn't until I got sick that my views on it completely changed.
Such a profound realization.
It is, because, we build our ethical philosophies in peacetime. We debate morality in classrooms and living rooms, constructing these rigid beliefs about right and wrong. But a severe, incurable illness is trench warfare, and peacetime rules rarely survive the trenches.
It is so true. That ideological shift highlights the stark divide between philosophical abstraction and lived experience. Yeah. When an individual is healthy, it is relatively easy to prioritize the sanctity of life as an absolute uncompromising principle.
Sure.
But proximity to profound, intractable suffering forces a brutal reevaluation of those principles.
Yeah.
And for Annie, that proximity wasn't just her own physical decline, it was intimately tied to another person.
Right. The report introduces Lily Tai, a 23-year-old who also suffered from aging.
Yes.
And Lily utilized South Australia's new VAD laws back in 2023. Annie and Lily had developed this intensely close bond, spending nearly every day together. And Annie made a pinky promise to Lily.
A pinky promise.
Yeah. She promised to hold Lily's hand while she underwent the procedure. Annie noted that Lily was so ready and so brave.
I mean, the intimacy of a pinky promise to guide your friend through the doorway of death.
It's incredible.
She watched someone with her exact rare disease navigate the very end of it. Witnessing Lily's bravery and seeing a controlled, peaceful end, it entirely demystified the VAD process for Annie.
It made it real.
It transformed VAD from a frightening theoretical concept into a tangible reality of compassion.
But the definitive breaking point for Annie, the actual catalyst that finalized her own decision, happened last year. After a major surgery, Annie contracted sepsis and had to be resuscitated.
Right. Sepsis.
Wait, let's pause on sepsis for a second, because we hear that word a lot on medical shows in the news. But what actually happens during sepsis that makes surviving it so traumatic that it alters your life philosophy?
Sepsis is it's an extreme systemic inflammatory response to an infection.
Okay.
Instead of just fighting the localized infection, the immune system goes into catastrophic overdrives. It triggers widespread inflammation across the entire body.
So the body is attacking itself again?
In a way, yes. This causes blood pressure to plummet dangerously low, which leads to tissue hypoxia, meaning your vital organs are rapidly starved of oxygen. To survive it, medical teams have to intervene violently. Resuscitation involves aggressive fluid resuscitation, powerful vasopressors to force blood pressure up, often intubation, and sometimes chest compressions if cardiac arrest occurs.
That's intense.
It is a massive physiological trauma. Surviving it leaves the body completely depleted and the organs often sustain lasting damage.
And Annie states that in the aftermath of that resuscitation, she had a realization. She said it was the first time she was more terrified of being around in 5 years' time than I was to die.
Yeah.
She actually looked at her father and said, "I've had enough. I can't do this." The trajectory of her physical suffering was so unyielding, so bleak, that non-existence became the safer harbor.
That is the exact moment where the theoretical ethical framework entirely collapses,
Right.
replaced by the pragmatic necessity for an exit strategy.
Yeah.
The trauma of the resuscitation showed her the exact violent reality of what prolonging her life would look like moving forward.
But, making that personal choice is only step one, because her choice doesn't exist in a vacuum.
No, it certainly doesn't.
It is heavily governed by systemic state laws. And this brings us to a section of the report that pivots from her internal decision to the external bureaucratic hurdles she had to navigate.
The legal landscape?
Exactly. The legal landscape surrounding VAD in Australia is incredibly complex. According to the report, VAD is currently accessible in every state and territory in Australia, with the exception of the Northern Territory.
Right.
But there are strict eligibility requirements. It's available to adults with advanced, incurable illnesses likely to cause death within 6 to 12 months, and this must be approved by 2 specially trained doctors.
Okay.
But here is the friction point, specifically in South Australia where Annie lives. Under South Australian law, doctors and health practitioners are legally prohibited from initiating discussions about voluntary assisted dying.
Or even suggesting it.
Yes, or even suggesting it to a patient. If a health worker initiates that conversation, they face disciplinary action. It is quite literally a legal gag order on the medical profession.
This raises an important question, though, about why that law exists. To understand this friction, we have to look at the legislative intent behind the South Australian clause.
Okay, let's look at it.
This prohibition is designed by lawmakers as a protective safeguard. The primary concern is the inherent power dynamic between a medical authority figure and a vulnerable, severely ill patient.
I see.
If the doctor suggests VAD, a patient might interpret that suggestion as a medical recommendation. Or they might feel pressured into it, internalizing a feeling that they are a burden to their family or the healthcare system.
That makes sense in theory.
Right. The law attempts to ensure that the request for VAD is entirely patient-led, free from any external medical influence or perceived coercion.
Wait, I have to push back on that logic a little bit. Doesn't that border on extreme medical paternalism?
How do you mean?
Well, if a doctor is legally withholding a valid legal medical option that could alleviate suffering, aren't they violating the basic principle of informed consent?
That's the argument, yes.
How can a patient make an informed decision about their end-of-life care if the medical professionals treating them are legally gagged from telling them all the tools available?
You are hitting on the exact tension between the ethical principle of beneficence, acting in the patient's best interest, which lawmakers interpret here as protecting them from coercion, and the principle of autonomy, which is the patient's right to make informed decisions about their own body.
Right. Those two things are clashing.
Heavily. The history of medical ethics has slowly moved away from paternalism, where the doctor decides what is best, toward informed consent, where the doctor provides all the information and the patient decides. South Australia's clause is a localized reversion to a protective, paternalistic model, specifically for this highly sensitive procedure.
And Annie pushes back against this hard. She points out the fundamental flaw in that protective logic, stating, if you don't know about it, you don't know it's a choice.
Which is very pragmatic.
Imagine being in excruciating, incurable pain. A legal option exists to end your suffering peacefully. But the team of highly trained professionals standing around your hospital bed are legally bound to stay silent about it unless you magically know the exact right password to unlock the conversation.
Right, unless you bring it up first.
Exactly. Annie argues that VAD should simply be a standard part of end-of-life care discussions. It's a choice, an option on the table, not a mandate.
From Annie's perspective, this silence restricts her fundamental right to medical awareness. And her struggle wasn't just with the statute itself, it was with the individuals operating within the system.
Yeah, the report notes she had to fight with several doctors who had personal or moral objections to VAD.
Right, because even when a patient initiates the conversation, the medical system is staffed by human beings with their own deeply held ethical frameworks.
Of course.
Annie found herself in an exhausting position. She's a terminally ill patient, physically deteriorating, who not only had to navigate complex bureaucracy, but also had to advocate and argue with her own caregivers to access a legal right.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
The burden of navigating the moral friction of the state falls squarely on the shoulders of the sickest patients.
It's like having to run a bureaucratic obstacle course while carrying a boulder just to access something you are legally entitled to.
That's exactly what it's like.
But she managed to navigate it. She got the approvals. And the report shifts back from this legal battleground to something intensely private, how she is choosing to spend these final months.
The really human side of it.
Yeah. We see her balancing this public advocacy, speaking out against the gag laws, with the private reality of her family. Annie points out a raw truth. When you're unwell, it doesn't just affect you, it affects your entire family.
Absolutely.
Her father's initial reaction was fear. He told her he was scared she was giving up, which is, the most natural and agonizing parental response imaginable.
Any parent would feel that way.
You spend your life trying to protect your child. The idea of them choosing to end their life feels like a complete surrender. But ultimately, after that breaking point with the sepsis, he supported her. The report describes them sitting on her bed together and bursting into tears.
That moment on the bed, it represents a massive psychological transition for her father.
Yeah.
He had to cross his own immense emotional chasm.
Yeah.
He had to realize that supporting her didn't mean he was endorsing her death. It meant he was validating her suffering and supporting her autonomy.
Validating her suffering.
Right. It is the agonizing transition from trying to save her life to trying to save her dignity.
And even with that support, Annie maintains fiercely protective boundaries. She has chosen the specific date she wishes to die, but she adamantly refuses to reveal it publicly.
She keeps it hidden.
Yes. She witnessed a messy outcome when a friend's VAD date was made public, likely referring to media scrutiny or unwanted attention. She is utilizing her remaining time to be a public face for a controversial issue, but she draws an impenetrable line around the actual moment of her passing to shield her family from public consumption.
Which is incredibly mature. She is navigating public advocacy while maintaining private boundaries.
So what does she do with the time she has left? She has created what she calls a effort list.
I love that.
Right. A defiant spin on the traditional bucket list. She is prioritizing experiences before her chosen date arrives. Earlier this year, she celebrated a wedding.
Nice.
But the item on the list that carries so much weight is her desire to witness a birth and hold a newborn baby.
Oh, wow.
She tells the reporter, "I'm okay with dying, but the bit that gets me is the fact that I've always wanted to be a mom. All of my friends and girls my age are having babies, and I can't do that."
That's heartbreaking.
She is grieving an unlived future. She is mourning the motherhood she won't experience while simultaneously planning the details of her own exit.
This is a textbook yet deeply personal manifestation of anticipatory grief.
Anticipatory grief.
Yes. She has made peace with the cessation of her physical suffering, but she is actively mourning the biological and social milestones that a 26-year-old naturally anticipates.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But alongside that grief, there is a remarkable focus on narrative control. Also on her list is the planning of her own memorial.
Right.
She specifically doesn't want a traditional funeral. She wants a celebration of life. She has already curated the playlist, selecting tracks by Lily Allen, The Beatles, and Over the Rainbow.
Wow.
Even after she is gone, she is dictating the emotional tone of how she is remembered. She is ensuring her final imprint on her community is one of music and celebration rather than clinical sorrow.
Curating the soundtrack to your own absence.
Beautifully put.
Which brings us to the conclusion of this deep dive, really looking ahead to Annie's final moments. When that private, undisclosed date arrives, she has detailed exactly how it will happen.
Right.
She will be surrounded by her loved ones. The procedure will be administered by her doctor, Chloe First, whom Annie actually describes as beautiful.
That's a strong word to use for a doctor in that setting.
It is. And Annie has been told she can have as many people in the room as she wants. It paints a picture of a death that is managed, supported, and surrounded by affection.
Yeah.
But she knows the end is close now. The physical indicators are undeniable. She says she is losing the little bits of herself, the way she looks, the way she sounds. She notes that those things are really important.
The loss of those little bits is the steady erosion of identity.
Yeah.
Chronic illness first takes your energy, then it takes your autonomy, and finally, it begins to alter the very markers of who you are to the outside world, your voice, your facial structure.
Which she mentioned with her jaw dissolving.
Exactly. Her awareness of this fading identity is what drives the urgency of her message. She is documenting this process as an educational tool for others considering the same path, and as a plea for systemic change regarding those South Australian gag laws.
Her final piece of advice transcends her specific illness, I think. She says, forget about the bulls. If you're not happy, do something to change it, and do whatever that takes.
That's powerful.
And when asked how she wants to be remembered, she demands to be seen for her strength. She says, I just want people to remember me as me, not my illness. I have fought FIMing hard, and I want everyone to see that because I'm proud.
Good for her.
She refuses to be defined as just a victim of AG. She is demanding to be seen as someone who fought a horrific physiological battle and then chose to end the war on her own terms.
Annie's story challenges the assumption that fighting a disease always means fighting until the biological machinery entirely gives out.
Right.
Sometimes, as she demonstrates so clearly, the ultimate assertion of strength is recognizing when the cost of the fight has eclipsed the value of the victory, and choosing to lay down your arms in a room filled with love and the music of your own choosing.
Her story removes the illusion of binary simplicity in medicine. It really forces us to look past the neat diagnostic categories and confront the messy, painful reality of bodily failure and human agency.
It absolutely does.
And as we leave you today, I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. Sit with a question that Annie's journey leaves right at our doorstep. As medical technology continues to advance, getting better and better at extending the absolute quantity of our biological lives, are we, as a society, truly prepared to have the difficult conversations about what constitutes a sufficient quality of life?
That's the big question.
And when the time comes, who ultimately gets to make that call?